August 22nd. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, great, thank you. And do we have any minutes? Oh, we're doing that consent agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you for the new order. Love it. Okay, moving on to first Selectwoman's updates. Just something real quick. Wanted to touch on I've been having some meetings with the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance, the Superintendent of Schools, the Chief of Police over the last really month about the new security school personnel that I think some of you might have seen. They posted an announcement about that. They'd also come to our board, I know in June, to talk about what path that they would want to take to structure that additional security. There's discussion about a possible ordinance. Instead, they've gone in a different direction, working with the chief to come up with a structure where these new positions are going to be armed security personnel at the schools, but they're going to be paid through the school payroll, and they'll be supervised by the chief of police, but they will be part of the Board of Ed, fall under the Board of Ed. And so they're moving forward on that, and they're going to be, the Board of Ed is going to be meeting on August 23rd to make a final recommendation on that program. It is going to require funding because this is outside of their budget. They're looking at different options about how to do that, and that could include a special appropriation from the town, but it also, the Board of Ed is actually going to have funds left over from the end of last year that will likely cover any kind of special appropriation that they need to cover the personnel, the security personnel. So once it goes through the Board of Ed, then it will come to us. Yeah.
As for the money they have left over, is that from their budget or is that from the government?
Budget.
That's not the rest.
Right, yeah, this is from the budget. So normally they usually do give money back to the town. Right. So they're kind of working on all of that, trying to figure out the best funding plan. So they're gonna make a recommendation at their board meeting next week, and then it comes to us in September. So I had a tri-chair meeting to talk about this, and so more details will be coming, but I just wanted to make you aware of it. You will be briefed more fully about the program and the potential costs in September. So that's really the only update I have right now. It's been, you know, somewhat of a quiet August.
Yeah.
So. Any other?
I would just report the American Rescue Grant Committee, which was another great committee to work on. Such good people we have on it, we're going to be getting recommendations from them, but it's and we're getting a response, but we want to get a greater response. We're hoping the first announcement of who's getting grants will bring in more proposals. Right?
Anything, Bruce, on your end?
No, between all the meetings we've been having, and my regular liaison meetings and vacations, it's been quiet, so I've got nothing.
Okay.
I'm in the same position. I think we've got a couple of updates for youth and family services on the agenda tonight. But other than that, I'm good.
Okay.
But Becky, may I just add one thing? And you might have seen it in the paper, or it was on Facebook, but that Madison made the list for towns to be given priority for recreational marijuana.
I did
grant.
see that.
And it was because of the low.
I don't understand. I'm going to look into that. I did see that.
Well, it
and,
was three, Simsbury,
yeah.
Kane, and Madison.
Yeah,
and
I know.
It was
It's something about the way the calculation is done, and
that was surprising.
so,
People aren't thrilled, but but it was unemployment. That's probably what we got on it. But
I still don't quite get that either. But we haven't received any kind of notification about that officially, so I've not got any official award or anything like that. But I did see that, and I thought it was a little odd.
I think the two big things. One was the amount of people arrested, and unemployment. We got unemployment, so did New Canaan, and so did Simsbury. So it's good. They're looking at it. I mean, they're not thrilled about that this happened, but it's a formula.
Okay, with that then, I guess we can move on to citizens' comments. Jacqueline, do we have any citizen comments?
I don't see anybody's hand raised at this time.
Great. All right, moving on to item number 1.
Excuse me, Peggy, do we have audience here?
Huh?
Do we want to ask the people out here if they want?
Oh, I forgot we have in person too. Any citizen comments here? Sorry.
So I have one actually.
Okay, yes, please stand up and say your name and address.
Paul Wertheim. I live on 321 Horse Pond Road, not too far from here.
Yep.
So I've have been part of this sort of little ad hoc group in the CV Beach Association that frankly has just had it with Airbnb, and this summer has not improved. My parents, who live down there, have a house next door, and it's just been a disaster all summer. Large groups, transients, week by week, and it's just, it's affecting the character of our neighborhood. And it's also been a problem with others who are not here tonight, unfortunately, but we're hearing the same stories. There seems to be this common undertone. And one example is this summer, a neighbor we have, her daughter, it was early June, the house adjacent is an Airbnb. She was getting up to go to school. She's like, I think she's 12 or 11. And it's like 7 in the morning, and there's this group of Airbnbers, maybe 12 of them, and they're passing a bong around in the front yard, at like, I don't know, 7, 8 in the morning if she's on her way to school. And this is just one example of what these Airbnbs are doing to our residential neighborhoods to change, and irreparably change the character of these neighborhoods. Residential single-family neighborhoods were never meant to accommodate transients and to basically provide hotel or motel accommodations where single families want to live and thrive and experience the benefits of a residential neighborhood. And so I've been reading these zoning regulations now for most of the summer. We wrote a letter back in May, myself and Linda Marino. And I mean, I just don't feel that these regulations are silent in any way whatsoever. As clearly stated in section 3.2, in any residence district, a building or other structure may be erected, altered, designed, or used, and a lot may be used as of right for any of the following purposes and no other. And as you can read down, there is nothing stated about short-term rentals. So it's our contention that because, they're not listed here as short-term rentals, therefore they're not permitted. And I think the zoning drafters clearly wrote this to protect residential neighborhoods from accommodating transients. And what we're seeing now in our residential neighborhoods, I don't think they wanted that there. I think they wanted to preserve the character of single-family residential neighborhoods. And to further back up this, when you look at what is permitted in these residential districts, bed and breakfasts are only permitted in the R1 and R2 districts. My parents live in an R4, and I know Linda Marino lives in an R5, and that's just basically due to square footage on acreage. And so, in order to have a bed and breakfast in any of these residential neighborhoods, the regulations are quite clear, and they're only allowed in the R1 and R2 districts. They're not even allowed in the R3, R4, and R5s. So, we're kind of at the point now where we just, as these summers progress and this gets more popular, it's starting to have a detrimental effect to our residential neighborhoods. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other public comment? And this is an agenda item. We've had several meetings, obviously, to talk about this topic. It's also an agenda item for tonight. Okay, no other hands raised? Then I'll get to move to item 1 on the consent agenda. Can I get a move to accept?
So moved.
Or approve, I should say.
Second.
Okay. Any questions, comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Right. Just passes. Thank
Look
you.
at all that stuff to get done on the consent agenda now.
Loving it, yeah. Okay. Next item is discuss and take action to place the following questions regarding proposed amendments to the town charter on the ballot in conjunction with the November 8th, 2022 election. Question 1. Shall the proposed charter amendment to section 4.1 of the town's charter changing the term of the first selectman and all other members of the board of selectmen to 4 years as set forth in the Charter Revision Commission's final report and accepted by the board of selectmen be adopted? Yes or no? Question 2, shall the remaining proposed charter amendments contained in the Charter Revision Commission's final report, which report was accepted by the Board of Selectmen on July 28, 2022, be adopted? Yes or no?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and now opening up for discussion. These are the draft questions. We had a meeting last week where we talked about these. I've also invited town council to join us tonight just to ensure any last minute or other discussion items on these two questions, on the motion.
Is there any intention on order of the questions? That we, I mean, are we supposed to, does it matter?
I think this would be a good one for Carrie. I think she
Came from
thought
Carrie.
that this was purposeful, right, Carrie? Yeah. So.
Well, you're on mute, Carrie, you're on mute.
You're mute.
I can see you moving.
Does it ever stop?
You have trouble getting that.
So it goes from the specific to the general. And that was my thought process, but if you disagree, it's up to you.
I was thinking general to specific, but I'm good either way. So I was just asking, wondering whether it was intention, so.
Al Goldberg brought up last meeting, the exact same thing,
Yeah.
just wondering, yeah. But we'll go with town council.
Okay, any other questions about this? And if we vote on this, basically I will be remitting a letter, I think, to the town clerk instructing her to put these on the state, or send them to the state for approval. Then the state could come back and say, oh, we don't like it or something, but hopefully they will approve it. And then this is what would be proposed to the public on the November 8th ballot. So if I'm hearing no other questions or comments, then I guess we could vote. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And so, question for Carrie while you're here, though, just so I will be reaching out to you about what we can have on the website for this, because my presentation earlier, if you could review that and see if that is considered not sanitized, or I had a PowerPoint presentation. So, because we're now that we voted, does this mean we're supposed to be in the quiet period, or is it some other date in the future?
Yeah, so once you have voted to send these questions to the ballot for the November ballot, it's as if you've sent it to a referendum.
Okay.
So you should no longer use any town assets to advocate a position. Each and every one of you has the right to put a sign up on your front lawn that says, vote yes on charter amendments. The problem, where you get into trouble is if you use the town's website page or the photocopier to create flyers or to advocate a position. So you each have a right to share your views. You just cannot use a town asset. And that would include, advocating a position during one of your Board of Selectmen meetings, again. And what I would recommend as far as posting goes, and this is what I have said throughout, I always recommend posting on the website and in the clerk's office, both a clean and a redlined copy so that people can appreciate the changes without having to sit there and do a compare on their own. So I always recommend that. And I do know, because I had talked to Lauren previously and we had gone through it, that you've already published your approval of the final report and the changes that were being suggested. So I think at this point, once you've approved the questions, now the town clerk can forward those to the Secretary of State, get the ball rolling, get them on the ballot. And again, the only thing you have to be worried about is using town assets to advocate a position on any of those questions.
Okay, great. Well, that's, I just wanted to clarify that again before we move on. So thank you. I think we're
You're welcome.
November 8th.
There we go.
Oh.
There we go.
So, all right, good. Well, with that, then I'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Discuss and take action to approve a recommendation from the new elementary school building committee to award BBH Integrated Services, Inc. as the commission agent for a fee not to exceed $120,000.
So moved. Second.
Okay, and who is here to discuss this? Is it Bill?
Billy's on, I think.
Yes, I just promoted him.
Okay.
There he is.
And maybe you can explain to the public what a commissioning agent is, Bill.
Sure. A commissioning agent reviews all the mechanical and the building envelope to make sure that it's installed per the plans. They also are a third-party reviewer of the mechanical systems to make sure that the design meets the requirements of the codes and what we ask for. So they're, they work directly for the town or the building committee, making sure that we get what we want. And what's happened in the past and why the commissioning agents are required now by the state is, the mechanical systems, the heating system works perfect and the electrical system works perfect, but for some reason they don't work together well. And no one really checked in the past that, I think. So now the history is that, we have a commissioning agency, it's a requirement, a professional engineering firm that will, look and make sure that all the pieces work together and the building systems, including the envelope of the building, all works appropriately and that we get what we want and what we need.
Okay.
Very clear. Thanks, Billy.
Yep.
You're
Any other
welcome.
questions from board members? No? All right, with that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Great, thank you. And we're excited to see things moving along with the elementary school, so that's great.
The committee is very aggressive and doing a great job.
Yeah,
Nice.
absolutely. So
Great.
keep to that timetable, right? No pressure.
Billy's a slave driver.
I don't really need to be. The chairman is very active and very on top of the committee, and the committee is very excited about what they're doing. It's a great committee, and I'm happy to help them, but they don't need much.
Nice.
And Graham apologizes. He's on vacation with his family, and he couldn't be here tonight, so I was happy to step in.
Nice.
Great, thanks. Okay. All right, with that, then, the next item on the agenda, number 4, discuss and take action to approve a recommendation from the ad hoc ARP funding committee to fund round 8 ARP funding in the amount of $34,940 pending Board of Finance approval.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. All right, so this is, I think, 2 different projects?
Right,
yes,
Yeah,
it's
that's right. And so, I don't know, maybe, Lauren, if you want to talk through the 2 projects, and then, I know we have some people who might want to chime in.
Sure. So one project is to help the Women's Club of Madison, and the other project is to help the Madison Lyric Stage create a permanent outdoor performance venue. And both requests come from an inability to fundraise during COVID. So they've asked the town to allocate ARP funding that would help offset that loss of revenue that they experienced due to all the shutdowns.
Great.
May I just, Kathy's,
Kathy's, yeah, I was gonna say Kathy.
I wanted to say something, yes.
Yes.
I'm proudly representing my, the local club of Madison, as
Yep.
you know, I'm the state president now of the UNWC. And we're so thrilled and honored that you gave us the consideration in the committee. And we have been doing this domestic violence project in October since I've been a member for 33 years, and we've been doing it right every October. So this is another way that we promote a safe community, and we're very proud to have you consider us for this grant.
and the grant is just gonna provide paper, the signs for around town,
Yeah.
just make people aware, you folks do a great job.
Yeah.
We'll probably be knocking on your door for
Oh,
a
yeah.
proclamation.
Yeah.
She might have done it already.
Yeah. And then the sign out front, we always go in front of town hall,
Right,
so
so
that's great.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
Yeah, that's great. Any other comments? No, but I think otherwise, great. And I know the committee spends a lot of time vetting. They put a application process together and they deliberate. And they don't accept everything also, from what I'm learning, so. So I guess with that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, okay, funding approved, so thank you. And just for the public's benefit, we're gonna continue to see these on the agenda, and I think it's important that if you wanna apply for something with the ARPA funds, there's a application that's on the website that's under the American Rescue Plan Funds section, and there's a committee that you would go through. You do an application, go to the committee would make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and then this goes to the Board of Finance for final approval. So it can be a pretty quick process actually to get funding, so if it's needed.
May I ask a question? Do you know, so ours is purchasing things, do we bring like receipts if it does get passed? I mean, I'm putting probably
I think
the
that
cart
it's-
before the horse, but.
Depending on the dollar amount, so I would talk to Stacy.
Okay.
And then she'll explain to you, because different thresholds require different things.
Right, of course, it's
So depending on the amount of money, it may be that you just have to certify that you're spending it according to the plans, or others might require some sort of
Or be
audit.
prepared to
Yeah.
have backup as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so
and then
as
you have to do a certification and keep a file, but she'll explain it to you.
As
Okay.
soon as we ask for an estimate, of course, they're calling us, asking us if we're ready to
Yeah.
go,
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So,
Thank
but
you.
I think this goes on the Board of Finance's agenda in September.
Okay.
So they're middle of September, I don't know the exact date, so that's, and then right immediately after that, the funds will be available to you.
Time-wise, we're perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Great.
Okay, great. So moving on is discuss and take action to approve a charge for an ad hoc affordable housing committee.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. All right, so this is basically, Erin is joining us tonight, and the board got a draft of the charge that she is proposing for the committee. This is following on our affordable housing plans, and one of them was to create a permanent committee, and we decided to call it ad hoc, since if the charter passes, we're gonna have to redo everything by ordinance anyways. So this will be a 2-year committee that would convert ultimately to a permanent committee through ordinance. And with that, Erin, I'll just I don't know if you wanna put up the charge on the screen.
Sure.
And this was modeled after what other communities have done, right? Because obviously a lot of towns are kind of going through this process now since they've completed their plans that the state requires. And so.
Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing what I'm sharing. Are we on the right page here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Too many windows open, sorry. Yes, so the part of the documents, the guidance documents that the state put out for drafting affordable housing plans also reference some model municipalities. So I went back to some of those towns and looked at some of their charges, basically did a compilation of various duties, and also pulled our major goals from our specific affordable housing plan. One thing where we got a little more creative, I think, is looking at desirable membership characteristics that I thought could bring a lot to our committee. Clearly, we're looking for individuals who have a commitment to expanding opportunities for housing in town, but we thought also experience in real estate, property development, as well as the finance and accounting. And we thought definitely the advertising and marketing was a good component, because part of our goals in our plan is to incorporate better outreach to our residents and to local realtors, things like that. And so these are just, I think will give us a broad group for our committee here.
And these are just guidelines, but you'd like to have something rounded out, but obviously we have to see who applies.
Sure.
So.
Sure, and we want representation from our demographics of our committees. We senior representation, as well as all sorts. Hopefully spanning across our housing needs in the community, so that we get this well-rounded representation. But ultimately, and I guess the duties specifically of the committee, they're charged with implementing our affordable housing plan. And as you know, we have various action items in the end of our plan. that and specific timeframes in which we're hoping to achieve these goals. So it's going to be this group who is going to help keep the board and the Planning and Zoning Commission and any other necessary committee on track to help with this implementation. They're going to make recommendations directly to you and also explore this possibility of establishing an affordable housing trust fund and specifics around that, procedures for reviewing expenditures, funding priorities, other funding sources to add to that fund, and then getting into the specifics of projects that may come up along the way, where the town may look to involve some of our own funding. Also, the public outreach issue and other opportunities for funding, as I had said, not just associated with the Housing Trust Fund, but also ways to help existing residents and developers outside of town finances. Ultimately, we also want to create an inventory of suitable affordable housing sites in town. Part of that would include setting up some criteria that we would be looking for in these types of properties. Locations, sizes, things like that, proximity to public transit, that type of need. And to create this inventory and to track the availability of these sites so that we may have opportunities to move forward on some of these properties. And lastly, they're charged with providing annual reports to the board as far as their progress throughout each year.
So
that's
so I was just thinking I don't know if there was any, I'm assuming the board would be supportive of creating this committee because this was something that was part of the plan. Are there any specific changes you'd want in the charge, maybe, or questions about the charge?
So I do. I think the first question is, Aaron, could you just refresh our memory what this references 830G as its sort of foundational document? What is affordable housing as defined by 830G?
That's the state's definition of affordable housing in the statute. The 830J is the statute that required the establishment of or the adoption of an affordable housing plan. So when we're looking at, I guess, this goal of designated the 10%, it's designating the 10% of housing stock as it meets the state's definition of affordable housing. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Bruce. What's that?
10%.
No. I understand that the state has established a goal of 10% of the housing stock in every town is affordable. What is an affordable house? What is affordable housing?
Like a definition of it.
What is the right?
Which is,
And it's a very murky thing. We're not allowed to use houses. I believe, Aaron, unless this has changed.
Yeah, I can read you. I'll read you the exact definition here. I just wanted to pull it up so that I have it exactly correct for you.
Like, we can't use Concord Meadows. Anything
It's-
with
Well, yes, affordable Concord Meadows does count towards our affordable housing.
Wasn't there a cutoff date, Aaron?
No, Concord Meadows is on our list, included 90 units. That is included. So
I'm sorry, Aaron, in the 10%?
yes, that is included in our percentage. Yes.
Okay.
Because it's government subsidized. It's not deed restricted, but it's a government subsidized development. And so that's what includes that. So affordable housing is typically defined as housing available to households making less than the area median income and costing less than 30% of a household's annual income. So our annual income at the time of writing our plan, 2021, was $93,000. For 2022, it's $99,700 annually. So our plan does kind of break down the specifics of what that means on a monthly income as well, if you And then additionally, the affordable housing, so it meets that costing less than 30%. It's either deed restricted, as we talked about, for a minimum of 40 years to ensure the affordability, or it's ownership units that are currently financed by CHAFA or USDA. And so that's where the Concord Meadows fits into that type of affordable housing. So there are two types.
Does the statute require us to have this committee?
No,
No,
the statute requires the plan, and that was an action item in our affordable housing plan.
Right, but because it's an action item, it doesn't obligate us to
No.
do that. We choose to implement or
Yes.
not the things that are in there.
Yes, that's absolutely
I
correct.
think at the highest level, my concern with this document is it looks like it's laying the foundation for a housing authority. It is laying the foundation for taxpayer money to be designated towards a fund for this specific use. And so my question is Aaron, do you agree? Is part of it this goal to create a funding base for Madison funded affordable housing?
So-
Wait a second, the plan highlighted an area to explore of that.
Okay.
Yes.
But that's, this committee is supposed to look at the plan and try to work through all the things, action items that the plan laid out. The plan doesn't say, yes, you should have a housing trust fund, it says that's something that could be explored. You think
Correct.
this
So-
is a very specific charge, do you think this should be kind of taken to a higher level so we have more flexibility for the committee, or you think this is too specific?
It's basically things to consider, it's
Yeah.
not things that they have to do,
Yeah,
is the way I do it.
it's kind of just mimicking what we have in the affordable housing plan, it's just saying, hey, we're supposed to follow through and look further into all the things that we have in our affordable housing plan.
Yeah, here's things we want you to think about, but not necessarily to action on.
Well, but it's, it specifically calls out funding priority and funding sources.
Yeah, but again, they don't have to put something in place, they just have to explore it.
Yeah, you can't say, okay, we're gonna do this, but then have the money for it, so.
Well,
They can't tell us to do anything, they're making recommendations to the board of selectmen.
and I get,
Yeah.
the document's very careful to say they're recommending,
Yeah.
right? So this is, we're not
There's not a lot of
imbuing
risk, I guess.
into this
Yeah.
group any authority
Correct.
other than
Well,
they're recommending.
But they're gonna do the research.
If I could clarify also, Bruce, with respect to a housing trust fund, it doesn't necessarily limit to town-only money. So one of the options or one of the recommendations in the plan was to explore other zoning mechanisms for affordable housing. And one of those was inclusionary housing, which is permitted through the statutes under section 8-2I. And it essentially acts like an open space fund. And so you can create zoning regulations that require specific, say, a development over a certain number of units to require so many as affordable housing units. If the developer chooses not to add those affordable units, they may submit a fee in lieu of affordable units. And so that money needs to be deposited into some type of account could be designated towards affordable housing. And so this is a place where those funds could go, just like the open space fund that currently exists. The town as a policy could make decisions whether or not you want to make deposits into that housing trust fund. And also as a way to accept donations or things of that nature. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for the town to be, making that. However, you do have under policy number 3 in the affordable housing plan is to make investments into affordable housing to expand housing options. These funds can be used to help reduce costs of purchasing property for developers, help buy down rents or mortgages, things like that, that can help create affordable units. So it can be used in a variety of ways. Also towards rehabilitation or repair of existing affordable housing. So it's not necessarily just committing the town to making deposits into a trust fund. It can be used just to receive funds from a future zoning standard. Does that make?
I just feel like it gives them focus right out of the gate. They have the plan. We're telling them, here's some things we want you to go think about. Then they're gonna come back with some recommendations. Doesn't mean that all of this is gonna be considered.
And Bruce, in reality, this, in the way it's looking, this is gonna happen. The state could come in with more additions to the state statute. Things they tried to get through last year, and when they couldn't get them through, they couldn't get the votes, they put this committee together. And those recommendations are all, from what I hear, are all coming back. So, but what I like about having a committee, on that committee in Hartford, there are no small towns represented. And I think the idea that we get townspeople that are invested in our town to become knowledgeable, and I think that could help us. Because I think as far as what we're gonna be forced to do, that's out of the hands whether or not we have this committee or not.
So the state's gonna do what the state's gonna do.
Right.
Right, and we're along for the ride on that. There's not much we can do except hoist the pirate flag. I think, yeah, look, I mean, I intellectually have a problem with the 10% number. I just can't get on board with the notion that there's a magical number in Madison, and they've kind of forced that number onto every single town. I think as a practical exercise, either converting 10% of our stock, retrofitting it, or building an additional, what would be close to 1,000 units, right?
It's over 1,000.
And when this group presented that our population is declining, it's not going up, it's going down, and it's projected to stay depressed. So we're gonna add housing stock in a time of decreased population. I'm thinking who's gonna live all this, but
I was gonna say though, that some of the things that are recommended in the plan, like changing zoning regulations to allow, like taking a large house and turning it into 4 units, right? Expanding housing diversity, those are, I mean, maybe, I think you're getting hung up on because I also think it's diversity, it's more than just trying to hit that 10% number. And so maybe the mission is to specific, I feel like we're looking at the overall, our plan talked about lots of different things, right? Not just trying to get us to the 10%.
Well, we were 1.6, 1.7%, so we were woefully under, regardless. To me, it's like a North Star. Go towards 10%.
Right.
Well,
so ways to go.
So that's a qualitative thing, right? We're not at the 10%, which is not based in anything other than a number pulled out of somebody's hat in Hartford.
I know, but that's not, we can't argue the 10%. We can have an opinion about it, but it is what it is.
So
unless we as a town, build major affordable housing facilities, we'll never hit the 10%. Think about the controversial project down in Scotland right now, 6 units, and I think 2 are gonna be affordable. Well, we don't get closer to the 10%, we get further away, because 4 are regular housing. It's just.
So our percentage is going down.
Yeah, exactly. And Aaron, are there any restrictions on any of the housing in Madison, no matter when it was built? On Concord Meadows because of the federal money, but is there any restrictions that we're not allowed to use some that would qualify? Because I was always told it was some things built before 1990 and when 830G came about and senior housing.
that predates the statute perhaps.
And then something about, I know I talked to you about the senior housing, so if we ever wanted to, do a project with a facility of all senior housing, I was under the impression that that could not be included in 10%.
I don't believe that's, no, I mean, the town can absolutely do that.
I mean, we just submitted a
Right.
plan.
Yeah.
They counted all that in our numbers, so and we had a expert, that
Well,
consulted
they
the board
might
with
have
us,
changed
yeah.
it, they might have
Yeah,
changed
they
it.
might have changed how
Yeah.
they were looking at it.
But when I
and,
looked at it a couple of years, it's just right before
Yeah.
Aaron got here. So, I didn't know about Concord Meadows with the money issue with the state, the money, but we could not
Yeah.
include all our housing.
And they're a majority of our affordable housing. So
Yeah.
which
It is,
I mean,
we only have 168 units and they're 90 out of that.
But I think that it's reflecting back to the bigger, like, to me, I'm less concerned about meeting a target. It's just trying to show progress, because
You're right.
even our people
Should be a
living in
trend.
town are struggling, our seniors are struggling, the millennials that want to raise families here are struggling, there's not a lot of rental options. I think the goal is really to address having
Options.
options for people that are affordable. And so, the fact that this in the mission maybe seems to focus heavily on the statute, we don't have to vote on this tonight, there's no rush. So we could think about the wording and maybe dialing it back a little bit and making it more broad.
I think I would appreciate,
yeah.
I think I would appreciate that. I think, I think about the process we have now, and when we get projects that make sense, we enthusiastically support, and we've got a project that we're supporting with tax
tax
abatements.
incentives, yeah.
We have a process, I think, that works, but relies on the private sector. I'm reluctant to get on board with a process that transitions this into a public sector exercise. And we have a trust fund. Imagine a day in the future we have a trust fund. Now we have to choose winners and losers in the private sector, who gets some of that money and who doesn't. And I'm just uncomfortable with all of that. So.
Isn't a trust fund in this situation almost like a reserve, though? Are we basically saying?
But it's government money that then gets allocated to a private project.
Well, we're doing that with tax abatement,
Or a town project.
right? I mean, I'm saying it's.
Well, and Aaron, I don't think I can ever get on board with a housing authority where the town is managing and building out and managing public housing.
But that doesn't mean that we're building and managing it. There could be the town has property that's selling, and they could use this housing authority as an incentive to have affordable component to it, right? Not that we would own it and run it, but we could,
Right. Or a
right? The whole process to sell items.
partnership with a nonprofit.
Right, and there was one of them
Yeah.
that was fabulous and needs to come back to
Right.
us with another property,
Right.
because they did a great presentation, it was great work, and I would really love to see them find a
Those
property in
things,
Madison.
right, and that's where if we had a housing trust fund that private companies paid into, just like open space, say they either add it to their development or they pay a fee to some sort of funding mechanism to the town, that money could then be used to help facilitate that without us actually owning or running it. I don't think we do not want to be running it.
I don't think there's ever been a
Yeah.
conversation about a housing
Yeah.
authority, so
Yeah.
I hear you.
Well, the housing authority, they're like, Guilford has a housing authority, but Guilford is not running, public housing, right? Isn't the housing authority just like a mechanism to manage affordable housing? Because what I think we need to recognize too, there's an administrative burden to have affordable housing in the town, because now we have to have town staff go through, and if somebody's gonna sell, we have to certify what they can sell, the deed, it's complicated.
And I'll tell you, I got so many calls on that one issue. That was one thing, when we talked about a committee, I thought one of the things they would do is help people that owned affordable housings when they go to sell it or they had issues, because it's tough for these people, and quite often they're elderly, and it's very hard to understand. I can't tell
And
you
that
all
kind of
these
money
yet.
could be helpful, because then we could maybe hire a firm to deal
To
with
do
all
it.
that versus the town.
We actually had to go to a.
That's
building
what I
down
think we're
the
talking
road.
about,
Right.
not like us going out and building,
Aaron-
housing projects.
Aaron, may I ask you, accessory dwelling apartments, can they be included in affordable housing?
It would need to be a deed restricted accessory dwelling if the current statutes, how they were amended in 2021, if a municipality does not opt out of that requirement by January 1st, 2023, the state, the revised statutes does not allow for ADUs to be counted towards towards affordable housing. That's one of the reasons why some municipalities are opting out of those statutes.
Does that come to us or the Planning and Zoning Commission?
That would require action by both. The
Okay, because we
commission
talked
and
about
the
this,
board.
that's gonna be coming to us this fall to talk about, and
Yes.
whether or not we wanna opt out or not, but just to
Yes.
flag
And
that.
we've begun that analysis, looking at the differences between our current regulations and the states to see how we want to align or not with that language. We don't have to change our regulations if we're simply opting out, but the commission could look to make some modifications to our current regs at the same time as well.
Right, well, and I think if we opt out, it gives us time for the committee to come up with the regulations that we would want for the ADUs, right? Which is a big factor, I think, potentially, at least in terms of housing diversity. But I think that the message I'm hearing is maybe let's rethink culling this down, making it more broad, so it's not so targeted to specific things, and then we can come back with a new charge at the next meeting. Is that good?
So I would
Yeah.
appreciate that, if we
Yeah.
could have a chance to kick this around a little
Yeah.
bit more and come up with another.
Well, and I think if you're raising red flags, we don't want the community to feel like this is
Right.
going in a direction that it's not what it's intended to do. So we'll work on updating the draft charge and go back to the next meeting.
All right,
Okay?
thank you.
So I guess then, do we have to move to
could we
table the
consider-
item then?
Peggy, could we consider adding an administrative help or something in this role as this committee is for owners of affordable housing?
We need to make some decisions on staff, right? That's, Erin, we've talked about.
That is another item that needs to be
Okay.
addressed as part of that, is identifying one point person to, as the contact.
It's a little bit of a hot potato, right?
Yeah,
Because it's a lot of work.
So I think.
So we can, I'll move the table, I'll move the
Let's
table.
table
Okay,
this.
all right, great, so I'll second that.
Second.
Yeah, I forget, do you have to move, vote on table?
You're supposed to, I
Okay,
think,
all in
so.
favor of tabling item number one?
Aye.
Okay. All right, great, moving on to the next hot potato. Discuss regulatory options relating to short-term rentals. This was just a follow-up on a couple of the items from our last meeting. Erin will talk about, I think there was a couple things we talked about. One was more information using on what our existing short-term rental situation is in town and doing some community outreach to get, and maybe a survey, because other towns have done that. They brought in a consultant and everything. And then we talked about looking at a possible registration process. So Erin was kind of starting to develop that and realized she needs to get more input from us about what direction that registration would be. And so I'll turn it over to Erin.
Sure, I have some,
You're on the stage today, Aaron. Look,
I know.
She's supposed to
The
be on
Erin
vacation.
show.
I'm always last on the agenda too. Okay, so just to recap, and Peggy did a good job here, if you can see my screen.
Yep.
If I can get myself to scroll down here. Okay.
go out and go back in.
So at our last meeting, the goal was trying to address disruptions, nuisances, things like that caused by short-term rentals. We wanted to look at ways to identify the various types of rentals in town, hosted versus non-hosted. And we even talked about how we could gather this information. Can we buy it from a company? Can we collect it from the state? So I have had contact with a company called Granicus, and I do have some preliminary data to share with you that I think is helpful. And circling back to our registration process, the goal of that is to gather additional information and be able to cross-reference complaints with the police department or various other agencies with an actual list of documented short-term rentals. Doing so can help substantiate some of the claims made by neighbors, or prove to us that these short-term rentals have had little effect on neighborhoods. Community outreach was another item that we discussed. Everybody seemed open and agreeable to the idea of surveying residents to gather some additional feedback. Two things that can either be done in-house, depending on cost of outside consultants, whether or not that's cost prohibitive. We can implement some basic surveying with the help of our webmaster here in town. I have a scheduled meeting, another follow-up with Granicus. They have an outreach partner that they work with as they work alongside municipalities creating ordinances. They do like to kind of get in at the beginning and help track at the time of implementing an ordinance. And so this company partner is called Bang the Table. So I'll be meeting with them on September 2nd and can kind of report back to you at your next meeting as far as their recommendations, how they've done outreach, or just at least even their costs to get them on board. I've also consulted with our land use council since our last meeting, and Granicus, who has done a preliminary analysis of our short-term rentals for August of this year. So this slide came directly from Granicus. At the time when we met, they had done short-term rentals in August and identified 120 listings, which is across the board through various hosting platforms, and then broke it down to represent 98 unique rental properties, rental units, I should say. The number 98, we have roughly 8,200 units, dwelling units in town. So this is basically 0.01% of our housing stock that is being used for short-term rentals. Although it's not far off from our presentation that when we first discussed this in May, when I had looked at Airbnb, they were upwards of 100, 150, 160 listed available properties at that time. So we're hovering somewhere in the 150 range so far for this summer. Granicus happened to have done an analysis last summer at this time and has found some growth. Last year, we had about 103 short-term listings across the various platforms. This year, we have 120. That could be from additional, the additional listings that have come on the market this year. It could also be the availability of new hosting platforms as well. And for the unique rental units of those 98 units this year, last year it was estimated around 83 units at this time. So they are showing an increase in the number of short-term rentals since last year at this time. They also did a run of figuring out the median nightly rate for units in town. As most of the listings are single-family homes, 83% of them are non-hosted. They're full single-family dwellings, which makes sense when you're looking at the median nightly rate of $344. Only 10% of the rentals listed were hosted with the owner on the property. So that was interesting to help shed light on what we're really dealing with. Again, most of the rentals were located south of the post road as well, which we had already figured out just with our preliminary review. So, just to give you these numbers, the numbers provided by Granicus don't seem to justify a need to regulate at 0.01%. However, nuisance complaints.
There for a second, Erin.
Yes.
That graphic that you put up was really interesting. The concentration of rentals on what looked
Yes.
south of Route 1.
Here?
I think if you did the percentage of homes in that geography, I think your conclusion might be a little bit different. You know, lumping in the homes in Dorset into the inventory really dilutes the concentration of rentals in a very small section of town.
People don't wanna rent near my properties. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, I'm not sure that the 1% of the 0.1%, it
Yeah, it's
then
mostly.
follows as a conclusion, we don't need to do anything.
Well, I don't think she's advocating that, she's just.
No, but that's what her slide says, her
Yeah.
slide is saying, this is
Yeah.
so small that we probably don't need to regulate it, and I'm taking issue with that.
Aaron, may I ask, so
Just like a
with the
statistic,
rate
that's all.
you're showing, if a house comes up and they put it up for, 3 weeks of the summer versus they put it up
Oh,
for
yes.
10 weeks, does that change the number? Is that figured in?
It's properties available for rent. So it's listed at the time. Now, yes, it can fluctuate. I think we can get into, I have kind of the complementary analysis here by the company as opposed to, this is their rates are based, what they propose to municipalities for fees are based on the number of listings that they're seeing. And listings meaning not individual units, but number of listings that they're scanning. So they're going with the higher number of the 120. Bruce, yes, you're correct that this focus is south of the Boston Post Road. Are we able to calculate that number? Yes, I'm sure we could. But I think also to keep in mind that this is a town-wide ordinance that's not, it will affect other properties as well, throughout the entire town and not just those south of the Post Road. So the nuisance complaints, this was another item that we addressed the last time. Are there other tools that could also help some of these disturbances that we identified? One is the noise ordinance that I think Peggy can speak to in a few minutes. Blight, trash, refuse collection, things of that nature, and parking regulations. In speaking with town council, if you do decide to regulate and enact an ordinance, you'll be doing so under Title VII of the statutes, which is general municipal powers. Keep in mind that an ordinance requiring registration fees and potential fines can lead to additional expenses for property owners, which could invite lawsuits challenging whether or not the town has the legal right to do so. Ira Bloom, our land use attorney, has informed us that there's very little case law on short-term rentals currently in Connecticut, and does recommend that we at least work with Land Use Council in drafting any recommendations that the board wishes to enact. Again, short-term rentals lead to the regulations, regulating short-term rentals leads to additional expenses for the town. So decisions by the board would need to be made whether or not enforcement and oversight are given to existing town staff or a potential monitoring company as well. Moving forward, just an example from this hosting company, some of the modules that are offered are general scanning, which is automated and operator driven through their company, address identification of listings, cross-referencing. They also allow for a compliance monitoring module and even a permit and registration software. You don't have to get involved in all of their modules, clearly, as we do have some online permitting as well. This company is sort of a all-in-one, it's inclusive. When there are issues with 24/7 hotline, they have operators of the telephone of company their phones that will respond directly to operators of short-term rentals. Also notify the complainant of the status of those complaints and any response given. They also, for enforcement, can send automated or automatic letters and things that are not necessarily done in-house through staff. That's nothing I've ever dealt with as far as enforcement. Most of all of that has always been staff handling letters and things of that nature. But they're truly the whole package here. And as you can see by the different costs of their programs, it's a costly service to have them on an annual basis. Maybe not for just a monitoring, just to provide us with one or two of the modules may not be so bad. But that's just to give you an idea of outsourcing the costs of overseeing an ordinance.
Aaron, would that then interface with our permitting system, or would it just be a standalone?
No, they don't. It's an all-in-one, solely using the Granicus system. So picking up on our ideas from last meeting and the discussions for a registration ordinance, I wanted to go through some general criteria. We used, if you'll recall, that Wellesley, Rhode Island example was a very basic. What's that?
Westerly, wasn't it?
Oh, Westerly, Wellesley. That's excuse me. It's been a long day. Yes, thank you, Becky. So Westerly has had a very basic ordinance for just registering, for tracking the short-term rentals. The very first thing in an ordinance is to define what is a short-term rental. And then the applicability of the regulation, for example, attached units, detached units, hosted versus non-hosted, just overstating here where this applies. The Westerly example does give three options for property management: the owner-occupant option, a property management firm, or they leave it as a town resident who can be the local contact. I put in here just a local rep. I think I need a little more feedback from the board as far as if you're comfortable with someone in an adjacent municipality being that representative who can respond within a certain amount of time, or if you wanted to limit that to only a town resident or an actual property management company. And then the annual registration includes a fee where we would have to designate a specific fee. The owner's contact information needs to be required, the local representative or manager's contact information, and then standards for what we expect for the local representative and how they need to respond to any complaints raised by either town staff or the police department. And Bruce, this is one that we had talked about the last time, this information packet, this neighborly flyer type of a thing that identifies other applicable ordinances and things that the town can provide to the operator to have on hand for the renters of these units. So that's our responsibility to provide, and we can get into a little more detail as far as what we want to include in that packet. And also some language that prohibits the leasing of your registration from one person to another, that it runs with the individual and does not transfer on sale of property. Then we get into enforcement policies, basic procedures on handling enforcement matters, establishing fines, what these penalties will be as you go through the enforcement process. Also allowing for that relief valve with the appeal process, and then including exemptions from the ordinance, for example, bed and breakfasts, uses of that nature. I put in here expiration date of the ordinance, if this is something that the board is looking to use the registration process to gather information to make future decisions and adjustments to any ordinance. Perhaps we'd like to give that a sunset clause of 1 or 2 years to gather that information. Probably 2, I think, would be more realistic. And so I didn't know if there was anything I may have forgotten off of this list or missed from our last meeting. But based off of this information, I wanted to provide a draft language, work with our council to come up with some language for the board to consider.
Yeah, I think the idea is to give her a little bit more, guidelines, like, okay, definition, are we gonna use 30 days or less, or are we gonna use a different time frame? Is it going to include, what type of dwelling units do we want? We kind of need to have, she could put a straw man up there, but there'd have to be big brackets depending on where we wanna come out. And so I think she was struggling drafting this, and rather than getting attorneys involved and stuff, we need to get some parameters or define parameters for her to put into this. Like, do we want to have, fee fines? Like some towns had fines if you didn't do it, and all this stuff. So.
One of the interesting this average median rent that we see for units, this $344 a night, it gives us an idea of if this is what the average income is, being made from a rental per night. A $50 registration fee could be considered pretty benign in the scheme of things, and even then is a $500 fee acceptable for failure to register. When you're looking at, this is likely the income that's being made over a period of time.
I think your task is a reasonable one, that we provide her some more information. I guess the question is what's the forum for us to do that? Do we schedule a couple of workshops where we have these bulleted, okay guys, for me to craft a good ordinance, you need to speak to this, you need to speak to this, you need to speak to this. I'd be happy to do that. I personally do think we need to go in the direction of an ordinance.
Yeah, I do too.
I think that ordinance should not be a prohibition on short-term rentals, nor should it be an unregulated anything goes, right? So our goal, or my goal anyways, would be to find something in the middle.
But by no means would expect we're the experts here, so I guess to help us prepare for a workshop or 2, I would prefer it to be 1. Maybe putting together some sort of straw man so that there's a stake in the ground of here's what could be included. We can scratch things off that were add, but I think having some expertise.
Like fees, she could show the range of what she saw, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't know what I don't know. So.
I think that's a great idea, because we just gotta work through this, and because otherwise it's gonna be back and forth, right? Between her and the board.
I know.
And I think we just hash it out, and then she can work on the draft.
I have to say, when this all started, I didn't expect it to be sitting here really creating something. I'm looking like the lazy man's way out. Can't we, isn't there a town out there? This problem's gotta be
So
every
there's
shore.
several, actually, there's a lot of towns that
That's
have
all over
really
that.
worked hard on this, and I think we should
Definitely.
plagiarize the heck.
Definitely plagiarize,
out of
and
that.
if it's working,
Right, so it's
I think
really,
that's the challenge.
it's about sampling, what other communities have done, and then taking that and synthesizing it into something that works for that.
But I'm sensing what Erin is telling us is there isn't a lot of towns out there, and we're sort of leading. So
Well, if you look at our immediate geography, that might be true, but there are other communities that look like us up and down the coast that are grappling with this and or have grappled with it, and I think we can, I would look at some cities just to get a sense of what they've done, not because I think they're gonna be a good drop, cut and paste, but there are a lot of communities that have done it. It's where I came up with this good neighbor idea.
But that's where I think that because each town has done something very unique to their town, there's no like template,
Boilerplate,
right?
yeah.
So it's like, so I think we have to take the ranges from the good and the bad and then kind of funnel it. So I think the workshop is a great way to approach it. And then Erin's already done a lot of research, but we'll try to get more. And maybe this Granicus has like a data collection of this stuff that might be helpful, and then we can just kind of hash out something. And then the other thing I did want to bring up, so the other thing we talked about before, because we talked about a package, kind of the registration, so we can, track these types of rentals, know where they are, know where there are problems, but you also need to have the noise ordinance, because that is one of the things that has raised to bubble to the top as the biggest complaint. And I spoke to the chief of police again about it. He was actually very supportive of developing that, would be happy to kind of, give input on how the police would enforce something like that. So it'd be kind of two things. We'd have the, registration, and then we have the noise ordinance, which is we already have parking regulations to a certain extent, and then they could, if there's more, the police commission can address that.
Would it make sense
So we
to
have
have?
parking, noise, and then this neighborhood issue is obviously a bigger picture, longer term issue. The tracking mechanism, the registration, to start to get our arms around it and see if we can really identify what's the root of those problems, and is an ordinance really a way to address those, right? Which is a ban. A ban ordinance would be to do that, but so.
I'm not saying the noise ordinance isn't in our future. We kind of talked about it when we were having all the go around about the hotel and the concerts and
then we had Camp Laurelwood last year, that was a big issue, so it keeps bubbling up.
so, but there are gonna be some very unhappy people that go to the beach club that might be impacted by that.
I've never been, big on the ordinance too, but I'll tell you, when Aaron went and spoke to the police, they don't have reports. I just thought, okay, tell us how many times, because there's no ordinance, it's a wellness visitor, whatever they call it, but
But I think
we're not tracking it.
I think that the natural conclusion there is that, oh, well, nobody's complaining to the police, therefore there's not a problem, and I don't think that the data is really, I don't think that's really what the data is suggesting. My concern about the noise ordinance is it's an after the fact kind of thing, and
It's not a screening mechanism.
I would like our work to be going more proactively towards the neighborhood vibe of all of this. So I think that if we just roll up our sleeves and we sit down and kind of attack it in pieces, that we can come up with something that ultimately is gonna have to go in front of the public and get feedback. I'm sure that they'll tell us quickly what we've missed, what we've gotten wrong.
Okay, so then we'll do the workshop, and then that will come back, and then take that information and come back with draft ordinance.
One follow-up question to that, Peggy. We had talked about safety measures before. Now, some of these examples of just registration don't touch on the safety issues. And I wanted to see if that's something you are interested in exploring, whether it's a self-verification that, there aren't any open building permits on the property, or, or that you're compliant with, or that you have smoke detectors and things like that. That's one way of approaching this, or the other option is to have inspection requirements or requirements that we spell out in the ordinance.
So I think we have to discuss that, right? Because I listen, somebody checks into a house that they've never been in before at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and at midnight there's a fire and they don't know how to get out. I think that's something we don't want to have happen here, right? Just the way a hotel and a bed and breakfast has, the appropriate exits and all of that stuff. I think in this situation, those buildings are functioning in exactly that same way. So
you're right. They don't have lit exit signs that businesses would be required to do.
Right. Well, commercial properties and a hotel or bed and breakfast are considered commercial and fall under the fire code. But I think that these are
Regardless of the-
still single family dwellings. So I guess my question is, do you want me to provide you with other standards in the ordinance rather than just
Looking at.
a registration?
I
Because now you're
think
getting into-
that would be great. I think that would be great. I think if you looked at the ordinances through the filter of, this is a de facto hotel or a de facto bed and breakfast, what are the appropriate safety things that we should consider? I'm not saying we would incorporate everything in there, but I'm just saying that would be a great help.
Right, but I mean, I've rented a home before, and I would not expect to have signage, as an example, up in the person's home. I think a welcome note that has specifics about entering the building and safety precautions and all that is expected. But not necessarily like, this is the exit with flashing signs in somebody's home.
No, and I'm not
It's
suggesting a
totally
particular.
It's extra must have, yeah.
I'm not suggesting a particular thing, I'm saying these are the things that we should be considering.
Right.
I've rented VRBOs that do have all of that stuff.
Right.
So,
You
not like in your face, but.
I'm kind of surprised that hasn't been addressed. Years ago, when I was still mad at Sam DeBurra, and kept laughing, I was doing a fundraiser in town and we had a tent up on the Citizens Bank property. This tent had no size. It was a tent, and we were having the kickoff, it was a decorated show house. My friend Sam showed up and told me I had to put lit exit signs on it was a law. So the fact that they could walk out anywhere they wanted to, I had to have a plan how they could get out. Remember, no sides. So the fact that you could have a large house with 5 bedrooms and you don't have to take any of these precautions, it's interesting.
I think ultimately, this is gonna be a state issue, because it's just converging, right? And the growth is so rapid, and you're gonna have an event happen eventually
A friend of mine has an apartment in New York, and he used to lend his apartment out all the time, and a couple of years ago, he was told, and it was the hotels that really got up against these Airbnbs, that he could only have people come in and use the place if he was there. And I'm wondering if I've got to ask him if did anybody bring that to court?
The thing that I'm thinking about though, and I come back to some of the conversations we had with some of the residents too, and even the public comment that was made earlier. I guess safety is important, so I'm not discounting any of that, but to me, it's the common sense stuff that people renting a place need to be addressing. It's the not walking through people's properties. It's, not smoking a bong and at
Unfortunately,
X
that's the law.
hours of the day, in front of children. I mean, right, but I guess my point is, there's gotta be some aspect of just common sense that we're holding people accountable to here versus a regulation or an ordinance. So, I don't know, that's the part I struggle with a little bit, it's just, people being courteous, for God's
I
sake.
think if we could rely on common sense, we probably wouldn't be talking about this at all.
Right. But there is a fine line of how far we take ordinances
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
regulation.
You can't regulate this
Yeah,
behavior.
so I guess-
You can't regulate
You've got people
Right.
buying.
Stupid is stupid, I guess is my point, so.
Yeah, and some of this information, I think, can be submitted as part of the application process, where the operator is responsible for submitting their information packet that they provide to all the occupants, their renters. And
Right.
so then we know that they have this available, we've reviewed it, they have the general information and expectations of of using the property. And we've had some renters come and speak before the board, explaining that those are procedures that they already have. They have contracts and specific guidelines that they provide to their renters. So that could be something that is just included in their annual renewal and their registration. I just didn't, I didn't want to draft all sorts of an ordinance that applies more towards standards for a short-term rental versus registering and contact information for them. So that's where we're getting into, the light touch versus the heavier hand in regulating. So I'll give you a range of ideas for this, for criteria. And I think it's probably important to use some examples, Connecticut examples, more so as opposed to all over the country as well. So I'll look to have that. Did you want to do that as a special meeting, a workshop, or just during a?
I think it needs to be on its own.
Yeah.
I don't think
That's
we
its
can
own thing.
lump it in. We just booked like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and then maybe not try to do everything all at once, maybe just do a couple
Yeah.
of smaller series
Right.
ones.
We'll get something
Yeah.
out there, and then,
The other thing
Would
is,
you also like, I'm sorry.
yes.
the town has a lodging license process already. So maybe that could be encompassed in this whole
Yeah.
ordinance.
Yeah, no, it definitely would be in
What
terms
was
of how we would, the lodging, which is not very that sophisticated. Like, so.
Everybody can be taxed
Everybody
every
knows
day.
about it, really?
Jumping off point.
Yeah, so, but we'll look at all that and we'll get something scheduled. So, with that, then I would say, we can move on to our next item. I think we got some follow-up direction there, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
So the next item is another discussion item, and this is a request for an ordinance for property tax exemption for Gold Star parents and spouses. This was brought to me by Helen Peterson Keel, and just a request, and other communities has done this, and she gave me the example of Glastonbury, so I thought I'd bring it before the board to talk about. I think it's it's a great example and a way to, acknowledge the sacrifice of, these families. And so I sent around the Glastonbury version, and I kind of wanted tonight just to see, is the board supportive of this? There's some specifics in this I gotta go through. There's actually qualification in here relating to tax relief programs, so we'd have to customize it, look at what it would mean for the town. And so I sent around the ordinance with the idea being, is there support to pursue this? And then I would work with town staff to come up with something that would align similar to this with what, worked for Madison.
I love it, I think it's
Yeah.
fantastic,
Yeah.
it's a no-brainer.
Can we have something like this for the firemen? The firemen have some property tax.
Yeah,
relief.
yeah, and we just updated it last year actually to improve it,
Look at
yeah.
that and
Yeah, we can look at that, and then we've got this as an example in terms of who qualifies and how you define them and things like that. I don't know if Helen's gonna be on tonight, because
I don't see
it's
it.
getting kind of late. I gotta open participants. But, so I guess, we don't have to get into a deep discussion, but, we would come back then with a draft ordinance after I gotta talk to, the assessor, the tax, all that stuff, was something that would work for us. So,
Yep.
Any objections or concerns or no?
No, I think the tricky part's gonna be the income part, the qualification thing.
Yeah, and they've tied theirs
I don't
and
think there's a
to
qualification for
their
firemen.
qualification.
There's no qualification for firemen, is there? I think everybody's.
No, that's for service though,
Service.
that's service, yeah.
Oh, we could
yeah.
model it after that though.
So we'll look at that, that's a good idea, actually, I hadn't thought about looking at the fireman's one, so. Okay, with that, we'll do a pass at it and then bring something back to the board for consideration, okay? One other comment before we get to citizens' comments is just I got an email about letting the board know that the RFP for the tax reval is going out soon to hire a firm, so, I forgot to put that in my update.
We're gonna have a lot of happy people.
Yeah, this is gonna be,
Not gonna be good.
but just to give you a heads
You don't
up,
open the door.
that is coming, will be coming to us soon, so they wanted me to notify you of that. And I guess then, I would open it up to public comment now, any citizens' comments? We have some people in the room, any citizens? Yeah.
I do now.
Okay, yeah, please do.
I'm Rosemary Gary, I'm on 19 Texas Road. I'd like to thank you all, first of all, for addressing the issue of short-term rentals. And I'm a little intimidated by what I heard tonight with the discussion around the nuisance of short-term rentals, because I think we need to step back a little bit and look at it, unfortunately, not as objectively, but subjectively, that we're talking about our residential neighborhoods. It's my primary home where I live, and I moved into this for the community that's in my neighborhood, and that's what I look for in a neighborhood. I think we all do. I mean, the kindness we're expressing to Gold Star families for their loss, what that means to them, what our home, our primary home means to us. It's our place for peace, relationships with our neighbors. I mean, this is much more than the nuisance factor. So I'd just like to make sure that we can percolate that up, at least from my opinion, that this is much more than nuisance factor. The comment was made that there's been very little impact on the neighborhoods based on complaints. That is not equivalent to a small impact on our neighborhood, because you cannot measure this subjective piece of what our home means to us. When you walk home in the evening and you suddenly see 6 cars at the house next to you that you've never seen before, when you can't go over and have a spontaneous moment in acknowledging the neighbor because that isn't someone you know anymore. There's been a 20% increase in the last year. I hope you all realize when Erin, I don't know her last name, put that chart up. That's a 20% increase in listings. And you're telling us also that that's south of Boston Post Road. So we're actually getting inundated in our neighborhoods, or potentially inundated in our neighborhoods, and that's frightening to me. There's 3 on Texas right now that I know of. I also appreciate your comment, Bruce, about the fact that the concentration is lower, and I think the statistics should be looked at differently there. Sorry, I wasn't fully prepared for this meeting. Oh, and then the other thing we need to step back on, not just the effect on our neighborhoods, not based on nuisance, is defining a short-term rental. Our regulations have a term transient, but I couldn't find a definition of what transient means. Just like we don't have a tidy definition that I can tell what a short-term rental is. So before you go forward, or as you enter your workshop, perhaps that's where the first amount of energy needs to be before rules are written about what this is. What is it you are talking about for our community? Madison's a special place. We came here for this reason, and I personally don't want to be in a situation where I have a new entity living in the house next to me. I didn't even consider the safety things, which actually brought concerns up, but I don't want to dilute my first few messages. Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I just want to add, I'm the newest to this, because you had started discussing before I got on the board. And I've spoken to every selectman, and the quality of life issue here, we're all aware, we're all aware of that. So please know that.
Thank you. It's very different than nuisance. I mean, the nuisances I've had with the Airbnb are trivial. I would never call anyone to complain. And if they were my neighbor, you know, maybe in passing, I would say something to them, but it's not something I'm going to report. And that's not what this is about. It's a sense that I have coming home to my home.
Any other, thank you for your comments. Yes?
Linda Marino, 145 Middle Beach Road, Madison. Thank you. I want to also thank the Board of Selectmen for their looking at this issue and doing the work and study that they're doing on it. I want to reiterate Rosemary's comment that this does not address, yes, nuisance is an issue, but it doesn't address the fundamental problem that we brought to the Board of Selectmen in the beginning, which is this sense of community that inviting what in effect are hotels and motels into our neighborhoods completely erodes. I don't think any of us can dispute that having a short-term rental near your house is like living next to a hotel or a motel. And I also think, and I've discussed this with all of you, I think, that our regulations don't permit, they don't permit short-term rentals in the residential districts of the town. Short-term rentals are the temporary accommodation of transients. Transients is defined under state law as living in a place as a primary residence, living in a place for less than 90 days. The only time that short-term rentals is mentioned in Madison's regulations is in the context of bed and breakfasts, which allow the temporary accommodation of transients for up to 30 days. And that's bed and breakfast. That's the only time short-term rentals are mentioned in our regulations. And temporary accommodation of transients is only allowed in our commercial districts. And there's a clause in our regulations that says, unless it's permitted in our regulations, it's not permitted. So if the regulations are silent, it's not permitted. So we keep talking about how we're going to regulate something that that is not permitted in our regulations. And it's not permitted for good reason, because hotels and motels are in the commercial district. We all want quality of life in our residential districts. Bed and breakfasts are allowed in the residential districts with a huge permit process. And with strict requirements, only 25% of the space, only X amount of rooms, and a person on the premises. Now, why? Because you're not serving breakfast, are you allowed to unfettered rent out your house to as many people as you want and use it as a hotel? So I go back to the point that the way the regulations are structured and what it allows and doesn't allow in residential districts clearly shows it doesn't allow short-term rentals. And it doesn't allow it because they are residential districts. They're not commercial districts. There are places where people want to live in a community.
Thank you for your comment. I mean, I think I know we can't get into a back and forth, but I will say that we have been consulting with our land use attorney, and your concerns have been passed on to the land use attorney, and I think that the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission was in line with where he understood how this is regulated. So, but that's another conversation. So, we're not lawyers, we're not landlords, but so it is very different, when we're dealing with municipal law. But with that, any other public comment? Yes?
Yeah, and thank you for addressing this issue. It doesn't really affect me personally, it affects my parents, and it's been quite a problem over the last couple of years. And it's only because the people who own this house, they were a nice old couple, they passed, and the children who got the title to the house live in Washington, D.C. And they don't want to give up this house because it's a family heirloom, etc. But they're just not here to oversee anything. And so they actually lost their whole septic system after one season, 3 months of Airbnb. We don't even know how much of that stuff leached into our property, but it completely destroyed because they had so many people there throughout the course of the summer. So that's just one issue. I do take, I have one objection to the town planner's findings, just in that, yes, this may be 0.01%. However, obviously Madison is a destination on the water. That's where people want to go when they rent. I would say that, I don't know the exact numbers, but possibly 90% of all Airbnbs are in the R4 and R5 districts, which have the least amount of square footage, and that's where you get the problem, especially on Tuxas. I mean, that's R5. Those lots are small. You get a party of, say, 10 New Yorkers who are taking an Airbnb for the week or weekend, what have you. And for someone like this woman here, it's a nightmare. It literally is living next to a hotel, and there is a feeling of discomfort. And I felt that because I lived with my parents for a time. And I would look out the window, and there was just 25 strangers in this backyard. And, so it's just in the zoning regs. It just says that
I mean, just because you're getting into specifics about.
Well, it's just when you have a bed and breakfast, one of the rules is it cannot change the residential character of or be detrimental to the character of the neighborhood. And so I'm finding that, at least with the Airbnb in our neighborhood, it's becoming detrimental. It is changing the character. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. And I'm just trying to be accommodating because
Sure.
we have several hands raised online as well.
Okay, yep.
So.
Here's 3 hands raised online. The first is Kim Brunstad.
Okay. And please just try to keep your comments limited to like 2 minutes.
Hi, yeah, I have an email from Will Griggs. May I read that first and then say my comment?
Just submit the comment.
I'm sorry? He asked that it be read. He has a 6-week-old
All right,
baby.
You're reading it into the record and give his name and address and go ahead.
Yep, thank you. He says, I'm Will Griggs. We are at 32 East Wharf. I wanted to share our experience with short-term renters this summer. We have a shared drive that connects to 2 houses behind ours. We have a 6-week-old baby that was born at the beginning of the summer, so we have had a keen eye on a house at the back of our shared drive that had short-term renters throughout the summer. As it turns out, the renters made for lovely short-term neighbors, many of whom have had deep family roots in Madison. If there are specific problem rental houses, I encourage us to collectively find ways to make those owners accountable without putting a broad restriction on short-term renters, especially when a month-long rental in Madison typically runs in the 5 figures to rent. That monthly price point puts Madison out of reach for all but the very affluent and has the potential to block out great families who bring positive energy to this town. I would like just a minute to speak on my own behalf, please.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. I've done both short-term and now longer-term summer rentals. I have never had a problem. I've spoken previously, but there are many myths about who rents. I have never had a problem. I've had professors, grandparents. I've had my neighbor's own college roommate come and stay, the one who's testified tonight, with absolutely no problems. I view that there are a few houses in this town that I've heard of, maybe 2 or 3 that have issues. I question whether we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. As an attorney, I know how much time and effort that will take to put into drafting such regulations. I ask the town to slow down, to look at and survey the problem first to see if we're talking truly about 0.01% or 98 units out of 8,200 units being rented. And I personally know of 1 or 2 homes that are consistently a problem. I think we focus on identifying the problem first. I think that we can look at a noise ordinance. I think we should make sure that if police are called on the confidential hotline number, that is recorded and documented. This house, for example, has had no issues, but there may be one house that has lots of confidential hotline number calls. And a friend of mine was making calls about an Airbnb house, and she was told they couldn't document that. So let's get the real data in before we hire an attorney to draft all this legislation or regulation and find out what the problem truly is. Let's send out the surveys, let's find out which the houses are, and find out before we go to the whole throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Any other hands raised? It looks like there's a few more.
Yep, there's 2 more. Jen Gordon is next.
Hi, Jen Gordon here, 34 Lenore Drive. Slightly different topic, still beach related. My concern that I wanted to bring forward to the board was the issue of both cellular and Wi-Fi service down at our surf club beach. My biggest concern with that is just purely from a safety issue. I think about, folks that are moving some of their larger sailboats and that sort of thing over at Garvin Point, which is an unattended area. If an injury were to occur over there, it would really be at the luck of having somebody in the area to be able to witness that there was an injury and alert a lifeguard if it's in season, that attention was needed. Also thinking about the skate park and kids using that area. And just, with cell phone service and Wi-Fi being really spotty over at our surf club beach, I'm just hoping that that's something that we can look into making improvements in as we look forward to next summer's beach season.
Thank you. It has been a discussion topic, I will say that. So we're well aware of it, but thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other, I see another hand raised?
Yep, 1 more, Daniel Miller.
Okay.
Yes, hi. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Oh, hi, great. Daniel Miller, 15 Sunset Road. Thank you so much. And thank you for the presentation before about the short-term rental. I am not opposed to ordinance, but I'm against some type of restriction on the rentals. I just want to give 3 quick points. One is the history of Madison, which is a point I think I've made before, which is it really is a way that families discover this town. My family started renting, my wife's family, started renting here in the 50s, coming out for a week or 2, which they could afford, eventually ended up buying here. One of the ways that we can afford to stay where we are is we do some short-term rentals. We've never had a problem. I've never heard of a problem. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It probably does. And everybody should be allowed to live peacefully and, of course, safely. But a previous caller who said, let's get the data. Noise complaints to the police seem to me a great source of information. If somebody's smoking a bong, you call the cops, right? I mean, that's what I would do in that situation. Good neighbor, bad neighbor. And if somebody's renting a house to 10 people, it's a 2-bedroom, well, that's a problem too. And I'm all for solving these things. I think the baby in the bathwater is a great analogy here. Let's make sure there's a legitimate problem that this solves, because it really is a part of the way that people discover this town. And I know that we've had 2 sets of people that have rented our house, one of which bought in this town a few years later, and one of which bought in the town one way down. It's a very special place. I don't see a lot of summer share type stuff going on here. Not saying it doesn't happen, but I think we just like to make sure that we know what we're talking about before we start passing regulation. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Any additional public comment then?
That's it for online.
Okay, all right. I guess with that then, I think we're done, right? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you
Thank
for.
you.
Thank you. Stay.